to another episode of Empty the Playbook, where we talk some American football. Fantastic. Nice episode last week, talking about a lot of different topics. How's your week been, Thorns? How you doing, mate?
Hi, I'm good, thank you. I've had a nice week. A lot of reading, a lot of working, but that's cool. Um, and yeah, I'm excited to have another show.
You been doing a lot of reading about American football this week, or just boring uni stuff?
Uni stuff, but a lot of it's about American football at the moment anyway. So I've spent most of the time reading about Kenny Stills and his community outreach programs, which has been quite fun. Um, and also after listening to it last week, I was like, right, I need to try and change how I speak. So hopefully I'll be a bit more lively in my diction.
Hey, man, you're here for your knowledge, not for your charisma. Not that you don't have charisma, but your knowledge is what we need.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was a compliment. Anyway, enough about you, Thorns. It's not all about you, Jesus. Right. We have got another bit of knowledge. Another fantastic person with fantastic knowledge joining the podcast this week, who I'm really interested to hear some of his takes, because he does have some interesting ones, and I can't wait to hear some of them. So last week we met Ed Thorns, also known as Thornsy, and this week we meet another one of our pals called Ed Shapland. Shapland, how you doing, mate?
Hi, yeah, I'm good. I think that's the first time I've ever been complimented on my knowledge. I think I'll take that as a first. But yeah, so I'm feeling good after that. Ready to get going. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I meant it a bit more when I was talking to Thornsy, but you can have it too. Right, Shaps, as you're known, because last week I kept calling Thornsy Ed, and it didn't sit right. So he's Thornsy, and obviously you're Shapland, Shaps, whatever. And I'm just boring old Dan, because obviously. Shapland, how'd you get involved in American football, mate? Tell me a bit more about your American football history.
Yeah, so I got involved mainly through playing Madden, because in sixth form I had no lectures on. I had no. I say lectures. I had no lessons on Monday. So neither did one of my other friends. He took pretty much most the same. I say courses. Is it courses at this? I don't know. It's so long ago. Not much. I don't know. Took most of the same subjects. Most of the same subjects as me. So we both had free Mondays. And I was like, my brother used to play FIFA on Fridays with his mates, because they had no lectures on Fridays and no lessons on Fridays, and they called it FIFA Friday. He was like, have you ever played Madden? I was like, no. And he's like, let's make a Madden Monday. I never even played him at Madden in the end, but I bought the game and started playing, liked it. And then when I came to uni, I was sort of like in two minds to play American football or rugby, but I think it was you I spoke to at the stall as well, Dan, but yeah, so I just sort of liked the vibe, and I was like, yeah, I'll play American football, see how this goes. 4 years later, here I am.
Also, I want to let the people know that you're a big Cleveland Browns fan. Oh, I felt horrible coming out of my mouth. Tell me a bit more about that, Shaps. How did that happen?
Like, it seems to be the case that I just sort of go with my first, like, I very much go with whatever comes to my mind, and I'm very impulsive. So it basically came when I started playing Madden. I set my favourite team as the Browns, because I remember watching a film called The Express Lane, great film about Ernie Davis, first black player ever to win the Heisman. And I remember in the film they said Jim Brown played for the Browns, and because it was Brown and Brown, it just always stuck in my mind. So I was like, Jim Brown's team. So I went them. And then ever since since Johnny Manziel, I've been
Johnny Manziel. You started off great with the legendary, potentially the best running back ever, Jim Brown, and you brought us all the way through to Johnny Manziel. Thank you for that.
Well, if that doesn't sum up the Browns, I don't know what will.
Hey, we talked about it last week on the podcast, man. The Browns are up and coming, potentially pushing for the Super Bowl next year. I don't want to curse you now. Maybe I do. Maybe I want to curse you now, but who knows? Right, gentlemen. Let's get stuck into it. There was last week we spent a good amount of time talking about Deshaun Watson and potential places that he could end up, me and Thornsy. This week, a quarterback trade did happen. Carson Wentz ends up at the Indianapolis Colts for a 2021 third round pick and a 2022 conditional second, I believe. I don't know what the conditions are for that just yet. But yeah, that's what we're looking at. Oh, hold on. Both heads are trying to jump in. Well, Thornsy, what are the conditions, bro?
I believe it's a first rounder if Carson Wentz plays 75% of snaps and they make the playoffs.
I believe it's a first rounder if he plays 75% of the snaps or 70% and they make the playoffs. So I think it's slightly low if they make the playoffs, but yeah. So if he's their starting QB all season, it should be a first rounder.
Makes a lot of sense, but also I kind of rate the risk with that. He's been injured past few years. Whether he plays that, I'll get a bit more into that when it's my turn to talk. But I basically asked you guys this week to pinpoint one kind of winner from this trade and one kind of loser, as we like to call it, as our friends on NFL.com like to say. So I will go to the newbie first. Shapland, can you give me one winner and one loser from this trade, please?
Well, I'll give you the bad news first, the losers first. I believe the Eagles roster, which won a Super Bowl, it has a lot of aging players who I think deserve better than the rebuild they're heading towards. So yeah, I just feel bad for a lot of the aging vets. Would be my losers on the Eagles. You had a core of a team who won a Super Bowl, and now you've got the likes of Jason Kelsey and some of the other some of the other older players who've really been there for the Eagles, and then they've just sort of now been told that it's either leave or don't win. Simply as. So yeah, it's sad to see. I always do feel for that as a Browns fan. I always felt for any player who came to us. Like, it just seems that at the moment it's going to stall a lot of careers, a lot of great careers when you thought the dynasty was going to come, and it never did. So yeah, I'd say that would be my main losers, is all the vets players. And a cheerier note, I'd say probably the winner is Carson Wentz. It sounds like a strange one, but I know this might be a controversial take, but I am a Carson Wentz fan. I think he's been misrepresented. I mean, I spoke about the Eagles Super Bowl, but he was basically an MVP. If he didn't get injured, he would have been the MVP. I know, like you sort of mentioned earlier, he has the injury history, but you look at the last 2 years, I think the organisation failed to build on him. They failed to build with him, and they failed to put the talent around him. You had receivers dropping passes, like I think it was Alshon Jeffrey who dropped the playoff in the playoffs the next year. I think Wentz put something on a dime, or someone put something on a dime to Alshon Jeffrey's hands, and he just dropped it. Yeah, but basically, I feel like the Eagles were starting to let down Wentz, and now you look at where he's gone. The Colts have been a QB away from being a team pretty much since Luck. I won't get into the Luck situation too much because that's a whole other thing, but since Luck, and they've just had no luck. But now they've got a QB, and they've got a fantastic O-line in Indianapolis. He's got T.Y. Hilton to throw to. He's got Michael Pittman, who I think looks really good as a rookie. Great little slot receiver that you can get some nice passes going to. So yeah, I feel like it's the best place for Carson Wentz to be. Also, because he's sort of had a bad few years, I feel like the expectations are lower of him. So in my personal opinion, I could see him winning Comeback Player of the Year, because I think he has the support cast now. He's been I don't know if he's been told he's the starter, but I feel like he's based off the deal. He's sort of been shown some trust, and he's got a team that's better than, I'd say, probably better than any team he had with the Eagles. So yeah, I think Carson Wentz is in a great position now.
Following up from that, then, you kind of said that your loser from this trade was your aging, not your personally, the aging vets at the Eagles. Do you think now then, it's kind of a two-pronged question. Do you think the Eagles are in rebuild mode now, or do you think they can win with Jalen Hurts?
I think they're in rebuild mode. I know they have got Hurts, and I know Hurts looked good. However, I think it's easy for a mobile QB who a team's not expecting to play to look good. That's not no disrespect to Jalen Hurts. I'm sure he'll be a serviceable QB, but I don't see Jalen Hurts as a Super Bowl winning QB. This could make me look really stupid. But yeah, that's my opinion, which might be a bad take down the line. But yeah, I personally, I also think when I mention the aging vets, while I do feel bad for him, I don't feel like there's enough talent on the roster alone. Really, without the likes of a Pat Mahomes like quarterback, I don't think that roster's got the talent on it. It does have good players, don't get me wrong, but I think they're few and far between nowadays because partly of what I said, the mismanagement has just led to the demise of the once great team, and this is just sort of like the final nail in the coffin almost.
I think just to build on what you said about him having T.Y. Hilton and Michael Pittman, like in 2017 when he almost won MVP or should have won MVP, he had Nelson Aguilar, who had like a career year, was just phenomenal that year. And I think T.Y. Hilton is quite similar in the way that he plays. So I think that would be really cool to see that. And also see T.Y. reunited with a QB that can actually sling it. It's going to be awesome if he stays in Indianapolis, of course.
Right. My friend Thorns, hit me with it. Winner and loser, please.
Okay, so I think firstly with this, the big question when it comes to winners or losers from this trade is what kind of Carson Wentz is going to show up in Indy. Like, is he going to be MVP Wentz reunited with Frank Reich, or is he going to be like as he has been the last couple of years and struggle and not show the decision making and all those sort of traits that we saw from him? So I think that's like the crucial sort of unknown with this question, this situation. But yeah, so the winner or winners, however it went down, is whoever in Philly decided to draft Jalen Hurts last year in the draft. I mean, I know we were sat watching it and thinking that's very questionable. Like, why are they not going receiver or DB or O line? Like, somewhere they need help. Why have they gone QB? But I think now potentially this could be a bit of a stroke of genius, moving on from Wentz, Hurts with a year in the system, year alongside his teammates. It could be a very, very good pick looking back on it. The loser I've gone for is Nick Sirianni, the new head coach of the Eagles, because I think to be a new head coach on a new team and you get put with a young quarterback who was previously a high draft pick, I think that's quite a bad situation to be in as a young head coach. Again, not to disrespect Jalen Hurts, but he might not work with what Sirianni wants to do. He might not progress into the QB that some people think he can be. But I think as well, because of where he was drafted last year, Sirianni's in a bit of a dodgy position to go and pick someone like Trey Lance,
or
Justin Fields. Yeah, I've got it on my notes with Lance, Fields, so that's wow. Anyway, or potentially Zach Wilson if he falls to them at 6. Whereas I think he's sort of a bit hamstrung by having to go with Hurts for this year. So potentially that would be my loser. And a little add on as well, I think the Jets trade market for Sam Darnold has definitely plummeted after the Wentz trade. Because obviously after Matthew Stafford, everyone like, yeah, they get first picks, second picks, all this stuff. But now I think they've come back down to reality and Darnold is not as valuable as he was 2 weeks ago.
Interesting. Thank you very much. And you talked about obviously Nick Sirianni being your loser there, and Jalen Hurts might not be what he wants. Do you think if this season goes down the pan and they say finish 4-12, which might make the playoffs in the NFC East, who knows? But if they finish say 4-12 and have a terrible season and Jalen Hurts is shocking, do you think Sirianni loses his job, or do you think he gets time to draft his quarterback and implement his system? What do you think?
I think he needs time to implement his system and his way of doing things. I think that the problem could have been if he had Carson Wentz, he has that sort of figure to say, well, we're just going to bring him in for 2 years to mentor, or maybe a third year. But I think with Hurts, it's a lot less. There's less patience, and it puts pressure on Sirianni to find a guy sort of straight away. So I don't think he'll be fired at the end of this year. I don't think the Eagles are in a place where he's under too much pressure, like Shap says they are in a rebuild. So or arguably in a rebuild. But anyway, I don't think he's under that sort of pressure. I think the danger would be what happened to Matt Patricia, where he was never really allowed to get his guy at QB and never got his, I don't know, his defensive coordinator, but never got his like vision of offense because he was stuck with Stafford for the whole time. So that's more of like where I think that comes from. But yeah.
I was just saying, because obviously he was talking about the trade market for Darnold. Do you think that sort of influences their decision with him? Do you think they'll stick with him or for a year and draft a QB, or sort of just try and get whatever they can for him and take what they can get in the draft, or not draft a QB and fix one of the many other holes on that roster? Maybe trade out the spot.
I think I can't see Darnold being great in New York, really, like the way that his career started. So for them to stick with him, I think it would be a question of, do they like Wilson, Fields, or Lance? Like presuming that Lawrence goes number one. Although actually, I read an article earlier which said apparently some teams favour Zach Wilson over Trevor Lawrence, which is, I know, a conversation for another day, but still quite interesting. I think I think they should really build the roster up before bringing in a rookie QB, especially the O-line with the poor status in aside from Mekhi Becton. I think get another tackle, get potentially Penei Sewell to fill in the left tackle spot, and then look to get a young QB after that, rather than, you know, throwing Darnold away, being stuck with, I think it was Trevor Siemian or someone like that as their backup this year. I think that's much better from a competitive standpoint. Joe Flacco, sorry. Yeah. So, yeah.
Thank you, Thorns. Some good points there. I'm going to steal the limelight, if that's all right, and give you my trade winners or trade winner and trade loser. Someone that is just bossing his job, Chris Ballard, who is the general manager of the Indianapolis Colts. Last few years, trades, draft, the man's killing it. Like, absolutely killing it. He picked up a team that was in the middle of that kind of like Andrew Luck. He was injured, then he was back for a bit, then he retired, and he still kept them competitive. Got in Jacoby Brissett, and the last few years he's drafted Quentin Nelson, Darius Leonard. This past year, according to NFL.com, the best draft class of this year, currently anyway. Who knows a few years down the line. But you think you got Jonathan Taylor, who's looking like they're running back long term. Shaps has already touched upon the elite receiver they drafted in Michael Pittman, who's a stud. He also dealt with as well, which I completely forgot about, the Josh McDaniels debacle, whatever the word is, when he was the head coach of the Colts, and then he wasn't. And they've just been competitive every year. And I think this trade, like I've already kind of alluded to, that the riskiness / reward of that conditional second round pick potentially turning into a first, I think was genius. Because, you know, if Carson Wentz turns up, plays the entire season, balls out, you've won the trade. If Carson Wentz, you know, plays most of the season, does well, misses a few games because of injuries, you still make the playoffs, and then you keep that first round pick next year, you've won the trade. I just think he's just consistently smashing his job. So I just think Chris Ballard deserves kudos for what he's doing, and keep smashing your job, Chris, because I know you're a regular listener as well. So well done. The loser from this trade for me, pretty much all of them, and let's count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 quarterbacks were taken in the 2016 draft. Well, all those guys are not with their teams anymore. They're the losers. The teams that drafted him, the losers of this trade. Except for one guy who may stick with the team that drafted him, but may be gone in this offseason. Who knows? Dak Prescott for the Cowboys was drafted in the 4th round of that draft. The 13, potentially that 14th guy that was drafted, QB in the 2016 draft, it's not worked out well at their teams, and so that's my loser.
Yeah, so I wanted to add a little fun stat I saw the other day to your point about the QBs in the 2016 draft. So obviously you had Carson ended up getting paid before the trade, and so did Jared Goff, and they actually managed to break the record for the most dead cap within the space of a couple of weeks. I think so. I've got it here. I think it was in my notes. I think it was $22.2 million in dead cap for Jared Goff for the Rams next year, and the Eagles have an eye-watering 33.8 million. So it's a real crippling for the team. The other thing I'd say is when you're obviously talking about the great work by Chris Ballard at GM, I would throw in my pence worth, which I feel like last year probably wasn't his best year in my opinion. I do agree he's done a fantastic job over there in Indianapolis, but I feel like I hate to tug on your heartstrings here, but I'd say Phil Rivers wasn't really a great pickup considering some of the well, I mean, I say considering some of the options available. I don't think even those like Cam Newton, who they could have got, I think as well. None of them really looked good. So to be fair to him, best of a bad bunch. But yeah, so I'd say probably last year was probably, in my opinion, one of his less productive years. Where obviously he's had the Darius Leonard, Quentin Nelson. He's drafted a lot of studs, but yeah.
You raised a lot of fantastic points there, and I'm going to run back through them in chronological order, starting with. Sorry for being OCD as hell. Dead cap. What another bonus for Chris Ballard. If it doesn't work out, because the Eagles have to eat that dead cap after one season, I believe it is. If the Colts want to cut Carson Wentz, costs nothing. No dead cap against them, which is great because the Eagles eat it all up. So another win for a massive contract. And the maybe not now. It might be different now. But before this trade went through, well, it would be different now, wouldn't it? Before this trade went through, the Colts had 73, I want to say, mil in cap. Now Carson Wentz is on whatever he's on. Absolute worst. They're down to like 40 odd mil. So they've still got a ridiculous amount of money to spend in this free agency. So I just think it's a win financially, because that was the first point you raised. After that, you're kind of right about Rivers. I mean, I would say he's better than Cam Newton nowadays. Yes, that style of quarterback, I think, of Newton, kind of not falls apart, but worsens as time goes on. Like, the Pats ran well this year, but passing-wise, they weren't the best. So I think, but, Rivers is the better choice than Newton, but also... I don't know if you heard about this a couple of weeks ago, Shaps, but the Tampa Bay Buccaneers beat the Kansas City Chiefs in the Super Bowl. You might have missed it because it was a snooze fest, really. But the Tampa Bay Buccaneers quarterback, some young kid, was also a free agent addition last year. So you're absolutely right. It does raise a good point. I can't remember if the Colts were in on the Tom Brady sweepstakes, but they probably were. I would have been if you were looking for a quarterback last year. As much as I hate to say it, because I didn't want him. I did want him at the Chargers, and I didn't want him at the Chargers. It was messing with my stomach. But yeah.
I had a question, quick. We'll
Go for it.
What do you think the emergence of Jonathan Taylor and Naheem Hines too? What do you think that means for Marlon Mack and his recovery from a torn Achilles?
I think Marlon Mack's either getting cut or traded. I can't see you getting much for a running back nowadays, really, in the trade market, especially a guy that's coming back from an injury. But I also, saying that, don't think Marlon Mack's a bad running back. I think he's a very good running back, and I think he'll be good somewhere else. I think he'll work kind of well. I think he'll probably be picked up somewhere in a running back committee kind of style, maybe Buffalo. I think he'd suit Buffalo. To be fair, that would be quite a nice pickup. But that sort of place where they kind of play it by committee, kind of like the Colts did this past season, until they figured out that Jonathan Taylor was kind of their main kind of target. Because I know the start of the season they had a few guys floating around where Jonathan Taylor, Marlon Mack, Naheem Hines, Wilkins, I think, was in the rotation as well. That might be wrong, but so yeah, I think Marlon Mack's a prime cut candidate, and I think he'll be out the door.
Yeah. Also, do you think Colts get to like week 12, week 13, say they're like 4-8, 4-9, really struggling, not making the playoffs. Carson Wentz has played up to this point 80% of snaps. Do you think the Colts then say, right, we're not making the playoffs. You haven't really delivered. We're going to bench you for the rest of the season and save our first round pick? Or do you think they will just honour it, let him play out the season regardless of what happens?
So in this scenario, has he already played the required amount of snaps for them to give up the first, or is he still below so they give up a second?
Yeah, he's still below, but he's like, if he played the rest of the season, they go above. If they benched him for say the last 2-3 games, they'd stay below.
Yeah, no, he's sitting in that case. I mean, I'm quite confident that he'll have a good season. Frank Reich is low key a bit of a QB whisperer. So I think he'll have a good season. If they're in that situation, he's sitting. You just for the sake of the future of your franchise, I just think you got to. And if they're 4-8, 4-9, kind of like you said, maybe he isn't the future. Maybe other stuff's gone on. I don't know. We're talking hypotheticals here, but if they're in the situation where the majority of their stars have stayed fit, and they're just it's just not working with Wentz, you got to sit him. You got to keep that first round pick. Not to say that there aren't quality guys in the second, third, fourth round or whatever, but you just got to keep that first.
Yeah, I completely agree. You've got the obviously like quite powerful run game. So while I think the system could help Wentz sort of succeed, I do also feel like you could plug in another QB and see out the season with another QB to save a first round pick. I think that's more than worth it. If Wentz hasn't played well enough to have him in the playoff conversation with that team, then he's not your future. Cut him, like Dan said. Don't take any dead cat. Cut him and just move on from him. It was a nice experiment. Could have worked. It didn't. If you get to that point, I'd also like to raise with Dan using the term QB whisperer is one of my biggest hatreds in the NFL, mainly due to Adam Gase being called one. But yeah, I'll say that's probably a topic for another day. But yeah, so just thought I'd chuck that in as well.
Right, we'll move on. I posed you the question, as I have been doing, of the top 5 most important positions in football. Now, I wanted us to think of this from the perspective of if you're building your team, which positions are the most important to helping your team win? Now, I feel like, I haven't heard your answers, but I feel like we're going to have a consensus on number 1. And you know what? Stuff it. I'll give my list first. So number 1, probably we've all got the same quarterback. If you don't have a good quarterback, you don't win games. It's as simple as that. You could have the best player at every other position, but the quarterback helps you score points. If he's not passing to your receivers, if he's not, he's not, might be running the ball, I don't know. But, if your team's not scoring points, you don't win. So that's my number 1. My number 2, I've got offensive tackle. And, depending on what arm the quarterback has, let's say he's right-handed, left tackle. But I put offensive tackle together because I think you really need to protect your top guy, your quarterback. Number 3, I put the opposite to the tackle, defensive end or edge. I think if you're trying to win, I think you need that rush, man. I think that's the most important for defense. And I mean, if we're calling the quarterback the number 1 most important position on the field, then stopping him has surely got to be fairly important. And so I think 3, I've gone defense. And I think I've gone defensive end, or edge rusher, I've called it. It's really interesting that kind of my top three so far, my number one being QB, it just kind of all from there centers around him. Is that offensive tackle is there to protect him at number two. At three, I've got edge there to stop him. At number four, I've got wide receiver. Because, if he's not got anyone to throw to, he's not going to score any points. So I think receiver is important. And number five, and this is my kind of controversial take, you guys might agree. Again, I haven't seen your list. Number five, I've gone tight end. And this is because, let me say my point. I've gone tight end because I've looked at the last kind of few Super Bowls, and you think how key. And we're doing this from a perspective of winning. So if we're taking this from the perspective of winning, this year Gronkowski balled, got 2 touchdowns. Yeah. The year before, when the Chiefs beat the 49ers, that Kelsey had a stormer. The year before, which was that Patriots Rams dead Super Bowl, Gronk comes up with that clutch catch in the fourth quarter to get the only touchdown of that game. So I decided that I think that's really important. If we're talking about winning, I think the tight end position needs to be on there.
My big sort of splash point that was supposed to be controversial was tight end, but I'm glad to know we're in agreement. That is, sorry. I believe it. That's all right. I believe it. No, I completely agree. I think the way I've sort of built my list a bit is I think about third down, like the money downs, if you will. Goal line. Who's your go-to on the goal line? Good big tight end. Who's your go-to on third down? Flex out your big tight end. Get a good tight end. We see this more and more in the NFL nowadays. A good tight end can be so dominant, and like even Gronk, who could barely run more than 2 miles an hour, could just because he's Gronk and is that good, is that big of a threat. He's such a mismatch. Even without his speed, he's still a mismatch on size alone. Flexing him out and getting those catches into him, getting the balls into him to get his touches, just will produce results. So yeah, I had tight end. My list isn't in a particular order. I thought about doing it. I decided not to, but I almost did the whole classic cliche, the 5 offensive linemen, because I feel like the offensive line is so key. I mean, you look at Pat Mahomes in the Super Bowl, because I think that, like you said, that's one of the greatest tests. Because if you're not winning a Super Bowl, no one will remember your team. Pat Mahomes was running around for his life, making freak plays, but he shouldn't have had to be running around for his life. He can throw the ball 50 or way more than 50. He can throw the ball like a freak if you can just keep him up. If he could have stayed upright, I think that's and his receivers actually made some catches, I think that would have been a different game. But yeah, so offensive line's obviously key, but I've actually gone with one position off it. I've gone with the centre. Quite a weird one, quite a strange one, but again, I have got my reasoning. I believe, like, obviously you've got the right side of the line is sort of called like the dirty side of the rough side. That's more of your run heavy side, and your left. This is obviously assuming we're a right-handed QB, as most are, and then your left side sort of more your protection side, and then obviously they do have to be good to run. But I think about some of the great offensive lines, like I mentioned it when we were talking about the Eagles earlier. I'm a big fan of Jason Kelsey. I think he's a great player, and I think a good centre. They go under the radar, but they can do so much. A good centre, and I think it's sort of like the captain of your offensive line, and having a good centre will sort of solidify the whole line just off that. So I think that's always a good point. And then sort of with you mentioned receiver. I did mention also have receiver on my list, but had a bit of an added caveat of number 1 receiver. Because I feel like there are good slot receivers, there's good outside receivers, obviously, but you've got that one main go-to guy. You look at Stephon Diggs with Josh Allen. You look at DeAndre Hopkins with now Kyler Murray and formerly Deshaun Watson. I think it just is so important to some teams, and like Devontae Adams, Aaron Rodgers. Like I could go on, but I feel like having that one threat that demands double coverage just frees up everyone else. And the fact that if they're that good that they can be in double coverage and still make plays, then like they're game winners. Number one receivers are game winners, and they just make the whole rest of the team play better. It's like I always think. Oh no, you spoke about the Browns last week, so I won't go on about it too much. But OBJ in Cleveland, he's obviously not had quite what he was expecting in sort of production, but he's double covered and he's opening up so much more. Like if you look at the Browns play with and without him, when he's on the field, he's double covered every time, which means when he's on the field, somebody's going to get open because there are weapons. You can just get your other weapons open. So yeah, the number one receivers got to be it for me. I also then sort of similarly, I obviously had quarterback because fairly self-explanatory, and then almost sort of going against myself, I said I've also got cornerback because I think number one, like you need good corners. Corners cost you games. I think there was a lot of games in the playoffs where poor corner play cost teams games. I think it was the Packers in particular really suffered from poor corner play, and that cost them the game. I do agree with you that DNs are extremely important with getting to the quarterback. But even if you can get to the quarterback, like it's the NFL, you're not going to get more than realistically, you're not going to consistently get more than like 2 or 3 sacks a game. And yeah, you'll be getting pressure and stuff, but on a regular basis, I think having a lockdown corner, like I think about that Jags team, the Saxonville Jags team, I think part of the reason they got all those sacks was just because of how locked down all the receivers were with Jalen Ramsey and AJ Boyer. So yeah, I'd have to go cornerback because I just think a good corners can really destroy an offense. And like you said, scoring points wins games.
Yeah, I think you absolutely smashed that out of the park, mate. There's some really good points to take away from that. I'm going to work in reverse order this time because I can. The debate is interesting. Is it rush that helps coverage, or is sometimes the best coverage, does that help the rush? And I think that's really, really important with defense, is that, you know, some places it works better than others to have better corners, and some places it works better to have better rush. You know, who are we to say, really? But yeah, it's a really good point, and I think it depends on the coach and the scheme of whether you rate an edge rusher or a rusher in general.
I was just going to say, just speaking from a Browns fan perspective, you've got Myles Garrett, who's who, in my opinion, is top 2 DNs in football. Top 2, yeah. I don't even think that's that controversial take. He's such a freak. Obviously, COVID slowed down his season, but he was dominating, and we were still getting shelled on the secondary. So yeah, I do agree that it's very scheme and system dependent. But obviously, I think I really went with corner because I've seen what happens, and I've seen the whole of the Browns secondary, except for Denzel Ward in places get completely shelled up, except for that random Pittsburgh game where everyone decided to get picks for no reason. But again, I won't go into that, going off topic. But yeah, so just that's probably my own personal perspective as a Browns fan, having such a dominant D end and still seeing us get concede 30 every game, except for when it was like the freak weather in Cleveland helped us out. But other than that, yeah, I'd completely, yeah.
Interesting. Thornsy, what are your thoughts on Shapland's list?
I like it. I think tight ends are really very not underrated, but it's just not as sexy a position as it should be. Like what they do in the wrong, like George Kittle. I mean, you're always banging on about George Kittle and the way that he blocks as well as a lineman, and yet is a great receiver. And I think as well, if obviously very not the right angle to approach it from, but when I'm playing Madden, number one receiver is always one of the first places I look in a franchise mode. So definitely that definitely makes a lot of sense too. Yeah.
I do love a tight end who can block. I should have mentioned that as well. As I've talked your ear off many times before watching George Kittle block.
But ironically, just before Thornsy, you give the list, I'm going to make a quick point, is that you talk about the tight end position not being sexy. That could all be changing around now with the likes of Kelsey, Kittle, and Kyle Pitts being talked about so highly in this year's draft. It'd be really interesting to see going forward. But Thornsy, what positions made it onto your list, my friend?
How dare you not put Darren Waller in that conversation as well? Anyway, obviously quarterback, no explanation needed. I also went with centre. I think that as someone who's always played receiver, I've never really fully understood how difficult it is to play O-line and how much the centre actually has to do before the snap, then getting the snap right and going off the block, as well as, a lot of the time being up against guys that weigh like 130, 140 kilograms. That's like incredible. So yeah, I also went with that. Um, Aside from that, I've always sort of thought there are four like cornerstones for NFL franchises. So you have QB, left tackle, number one corner, and edge rusher. So I thought I'd ignore that and try and go a bit off the beaten track. So firstly, I went with safety, like a deep middle of the field, L. Thomas in Seattle type safety, where they can just shut down the deep zones by themselves and set the tone for the defense. And also guys like Tyrann Mathieu, who are very versatile, can do a lot in the middle of the field, in the slot, and deep, and tackle and do everything in that sense. And middle linebacker as number 4. I think that someone like Luke Kuechly, what he did for the Carolina defense when he was playing there, just awesome. Like awesome. And one of my favorite players to watch, because I think there's a clip from the Super Bowl when they played the Broncos, and someone's like, he calls the play before the snap, makes the tackle, and you hear one of the O-linemen going back, and they're like, how the fuck does he know what we're doing every single time we run a play? So yeah, and also watching the Super Bowl this year with Devin White and Levante David, and the way that they dominated, throughout the whole playoffs. Like, I think middle linebacker is a very important position. And finally, maybe a little bit biased, but I put slot receiver. Kind of going off of what Shap said, like drawing double teams and creating mismatches and that sort of thing. I think when you go back and look at the Patriots, especially in the postseason over the last 10 years, it's always been Julian Edelman that's made plays. I remember the first game I ever watched was Super Bowl 49 when the Patriots beat the Seahawks. And I just remember every time it was third down, every time they needed a play, it was Edelman that did it every time. And also, something that's quite like overlooked is the fact that Michael Thomas is a slot receiver. Like, that's where he lines up on the majority of his snaps. So that's where he's big, he's quick, he's strong, his route running is incredible, and like that position as a slot receiver, I think is so important to an offense and quite underrated. So yeah, they are my 5.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, I think your point with the slot receivers, I did put number 1 receiver and I did make that specification, but I do think a slot receiver is extremely important. However, I did think of Edelman, but while I think Edelman is truly one of the best slot receivers we've seen and possibly will ever see, especially clutchness wise. I feel like there's a lot, except for like a few people, like you say, Michael Thomas. There's a lot of people who filled the role of slot receiver and played it well, which was sort of my reason for not choosing it. However, I do agree. I do agree it can be important. Like I said with my tight end comment earlier, I'm a big person in thinking, who do you want on the field in money downs, and that should be how you think about football, because realistically, all you've got to do to win a game of football is score points by keeping the chains moving. Yeah, and I do think the slot receiver is always a good option on money downs. However, I would like to. I'm a big fan of not using slot receivers and flexing out tight ends, because I feel like I'm a big fan of tight ends as slot receivers, because I feel the mismatches are bigger. Like you say about Michael Thomas, he's bigger, he's strong, he's big, he's strong, he's fast, and he's tall. If you get a good tight end in there, that's all their traits as well, which would sort of be my point on the slot receivers. Although I remember playing with a slot receiver in my own time who made a lot of big plays when he wasn't injured. That's a rich comment coming from me.
Nice.
So yeah, I will give you the slot. I've seen slot receivers make amazing plays and can be clutch. It's just my personal preference and scheming, if I were to coach a team, I'd put someone in the practice squad. If I had to fill the rest of my team with practice squad players, I feel like I could put one in at slot receiver that could run a slant, because a slant's a slant. No offense to Michael Thomas, who's made a career out of it.
Even the big boys. Sorry.
Yeah, that's an interesting stance to take, Shaps, but there you go. Kind of tying your 2 points together, I think it's really important. I think, Shaps, you kind of specified your receiver as your out-and-out number one receiver, and Thorns, you said that slot receiver is really important. But Shaps, you also did list some guys that do play that slot role really nicely, like Devontae Adams, and immediately the one that comes to my head is Keenan Allen. Don't know if you've heard of him, plays for the Chargers. He's a very good receiver. And I think those guys, kind of like you guys both touched upon, open stuff up for other people as well, which I think is really important. And you kind of said about OBJ, and Jarvis Landry does it a bit as well for the Browns, is these guys, they take the mismatches or they take the double teams, but they also take they catch the crossing routes, and they catch the hooks, and they catch the screens, and they may go for their 5 yards at a time. They may get like 10 receptions for 50 yards or whatever it is. But speaking specifically from the Chargers kind of point of view, is that Keenan Allen gets all these touches so that one play, Justin Herbert can throw to Jalen Guyton for a 60-yard touchdown that nobody's ever heard of, and now he's just caught a 60-yard touchdown. That's because of the work that Keenan Allen did, and like the Hunter Henrys and stuff, but mostly Keenan Allen getting those catches, so that the deep ball is there. So I think that's really, really important. Right. So we kind of said that those are the positions that we think are kind of most important for picking your team. But obviously someone else that's really, really important to get right is that head coach position, as we kind of talked about earlier. So I want to know one guy that you consider to be an underrated head coach in the league right now. And Thornsy, I'm coming to you first.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think Sean McDermott would be my pick straight off the bat. I think it's easy to look at Buffalo and how good they are now and forget how bad they were like 5 years ago before McDermott became the head coach. It's crazy because obviously I researched this as a good presenter or co-presenter or whatever. Journalist, I like that. And he's been historically already one of the best Buffalo Bills head coaches in history, and he's only in his 4th year on the job. So he got the first AFC East title since 1995, the first playoff W in 25 years, the 3rd most wins in Buffalo head coach history, and he swept the AFC East for the first time, first ever head coach to sweep the AFC East as a Buffalo Bill. So straight away, it's like this guy is, that could speak to how bad the Bills are and have been historically, but I think it more speaks to how good Sean McDermott is as a head coach. So I think looking at his tenure, though, I think it's easy to look at the AFC title game and say, well, he kind of blew it there. I think they had a chance to go for it on 4th down when they were down by like 11 points or 10 points or something like that. He kicked the field goal. And if you remember, the first time they made the playoffs, he benched Tyrod Taylor for Nathan Peterman. And that's when Peterman threw 5 picks in a game, which was a horrendous call. But anyway, they still made the playoffs, and he still broke the longest playoff drought in major sport, in any of the US major sports. So I think when you talk about Sean McDermott, you have to look at McDermott. You have to look at the transformation that Buffalo have made over the last 4 years, because he's really taken a team that really sucked and taken them to arguably, not even arguably, like definitely a top 5 team in the NFL right now. And it's not really because of, a little bit controversial, but it's not really because of like a superstar like Patrick Mahomes or the work of his coordinators and other people that you could look at and say, well, they've done all the work. I think he's built an incredible culture, a great defense, and just a very, very good football team. And a lot of that is because of what he's been able to do. And just like the final point is, I don't think he's underrated in that I think he's very well regarded amongst other NFL head coaches, but he's not really in that like top tier, which I think he should be. If you talk about best head coaches in the NFL, you're talking about Andy Reid, Bill Belichick, potentially Mike Tomlin, maybe like Mike Tomlin like 5 years ago, and Pete Carroll. But I think Sean McDermott is someone that's definitely knocking on that door, and if not already in that club.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the work that's going on in Buffalo. I am a big fan. I think the way that he's utilised and sort of cultivated, if that's the right word, sort of a cultivated a franchise quarterback out of Josh Allen, who had all the talent but none of the fundamentals, and he's just the way he's sort of dealt with Josh Allen, who could have easily busted. I think in a lot of places, Josh Allen would have been a bust. Might sound controversial, but you look at his first year, he's just running around like a headless chicken. And he looked at the problem. He went, "This is what we need to do to make him our guy. We've got someone who can be our guy. This is what we need to make him do." And he made a franchise quarterback out of. I no disrespect to Josh Allen. I think he's playing phenomenal football at the moment, and I hope he continues to do so because he's a joy to watch with Stephon Diggs. But I think uh, he was helped. I don't think he'd have done it in many systems, and that is the trademark of a good coach. I know Dan used my most hated term, quarterback whisperer, earlier, but I'm going to use it here. I'm not going to use it here. I'm going to say he's a Josh Allen whisperer, and he's just what he's made of that Buffalo team and what he's done in such a short time period is impressive. And I also agree that I wouldn't hold the loss in the AFC Championship game against him by any means.
Yeah, definitely. I think with Josh Allen, like you said, like it was him having the patience with Allen and being like, okay, he's not here yet. He's not what we necessarily expected as a seventh pick, but we're not going to just put pressure on him and do all this sort of stuff. And he didn't play particularly well in the second year, I don't think. And again, they sort of stuck with him. They didn't, blast him. He didn't say, right, we're going to get backups in to put pressure on him. They sort of went as he went, and now we're seeing that pay off. And I think that's a lot of that can be attributed to McDermott.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the kind of key points that has shown the kind of turnaround of the Buffalo Bills is the last game of the season where they played the Dolphins, who I feel like they're going to be battling for the next couple of years for that AFC East title. And the Dolphins obviously needed that game to get into the playoffs, and the Bills... I don't think the Bills had anything to play for at this point, realistically. I think they were pretty much where they were going to be in the playoff seedings. And the Dolphins had it all to play for, and the Bills absolutely tore them a new one. And the Dolphins weren't in the game. And I think that just shows the complete and utter turnaround from, kind of like you said already, that Tyrod Taylor year where they snuck in and ended that drought of however long it was, 20 odd years, maybe less, I can't remember, to dominating. And if it wasn't for the Kansas City Chiefs potentially being the best team in the AFC this year. So I think there's some really good points. Thank you, Thorns. I think Sean McDermott is a very good coach, and I think we're going to continue to see the Bills being good for the next few years, and hopefully so, because they play attractive football. Shapland, who's your pick for just coming in at the end, David? Yeah, go on, Shapland. Sorry, I'm laughing. Thornsy just throwing in the word sexy right at the end there, and I didn't know whether he was talking about me or Sean McDermott, but it doesn't matter. It's your turn to talk, Shapland.
Right, great. Well, Thornsy and you have segued me in perfectly. We don't even have to leave the division for my choice. And you're right. In my opinion, the most underrated coach is Bill Belichick. He just doesn't get. No, I'm obviously joking. I'm going with Brian Flores. I know you mentioned it there. You've mentioned his downside, which was obviously the game against the Bills, where the Bills breasted their starters after, I believe, a quarter or a half, and they still got blown out. But I think that is the one game where which sort of counts against him. And you know what? I'd say that helps me call him underrated, because he has had a lot of credit, but he's never made the playoff. He's had 2 years as a head coach, and other than that, he's just been a New England a face in the New England room. But he's proved that, unlike some of the ones who've left New England and failed, I believe that he's the future in Miami. And I think you created a great segue for me by saying about the battle that I think the AFC East, fingers crossed, hopefully the Patriots dominance is over, and yeah, so if the Patriots dominance is over, I think it's going to be a great division to watch. But yeah, so just going off a bit more on my Brian Flores rant. I feel like he was hired to coach a 0-16 team. The Dolphins team that from 2019 were being called like the worst team of all time beforehand, and they were told, oh, they're the next Detroit, they're the next Cleveland, unfortunately. But he took that team. I think they started. I've got it in my notes. They started 0-7 that year, and he ended up winning 5 games and going 5-4 to end the season, which obviously doesn't sound great. He won 5 games, but he won 5 games with a roster that was being called one of the worst of all time. He did have Fitzmagic, obviously playing his classic. I'll play well once every like 3 years or so to keep myself in the NFL. But yeah, I think what he's got in Miami and the draft picks they have, I think he's a real candidate for someone who's going to be part of a dominant franchise, because Miami's got nothing but pieces at the moment, and they've got nothing but capital as well. So yeah, and I feel like he's just managed expectations. He's managed to bring in Tua, who unfortunately it's questionable whether or not they're calling him their franchise QB yet. But even with that situation, he still managed to grind out a 10-win season without knowing who their starting QB is. I don't think there's many coaches you can say that to without knowing their starting QB. They had 10 wins. I do believe my one of my downsides, I will say again, was I believe he mismanaged the Tua situation slightly. But what he does on the field with some of his calls, again excluding that Bills game, is just outstanding.
Sorry, phenomenal.
Yeah, I'm going to stop saying the word, as apparently I can't say it. But yeah, so I think he went 10 and 6. Like, there's not many 10 and 6 teams that miss the playoffs. Well, unless you're in the NFC East, then 10 and 6 would be like a new record over there. But yeah, so it's just I feel like his team's performing so well, and I think he has that sort of Mike Tomlin effect from years gone, where he can sort of inspire, maybe not Mike Tomlin, maybe more Pete Carroll sort of, where he can inspire a locker room that does have characters. He can make them all, they all buy in. Like that team that was 0-7 at the start of the season, how he manages to take that team and get them winning and make them all, like, it's not like they traded for anything, no big deals, but he got them to buy in, and the players really believed in themselves. And I feel a coach that can inspire like that sounds a bit sloppy and sentimental, but an inspiring coach, I think, is this thing that can really change the fortunes of your team. So yeah.
I think you raised some really good points. I think Brian Flores, I think won't be underrated for very long. Kind of same with Sean McDermott. I think these guys are going to be considered very good coaches for a very long time, hopefully. Otherwise, that would be a waste of time, what I just said. But I also think it's interesting that you raised that kind of Ryan Fitzmagic Tua debacle, that who's starting and benching and blah, 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 blah. But it's also really fascinating, and I think kind of proves how good a coach he is that while although that was going on, they were winning. Like, Tua started off like 5-0 or 4-0. I think he finished like 6-2 on the season or something like that. But they were winning, and even though Tua wasn't showing his best, so to speak, the what we expected him to be coming out of Alabama, is that he was still grinding out wins. And whether Brian Flores made it work, the offense work, so that Tua could succeed, or whether it was a case of, he made that defense so good that there was no stress on Tua to worry, and he could, learn the game at his own pace. And I mean, who's to say that Tua doesn't step up this season? But yeah, Thornsy, thoughts?
I like it. I love it. I love it. I think his first season, like the way that it started was to get absolutely demolished by the Ravens, and then they ended the season beating the Patriots in Foxborough to make them play wildcard weekend, and that was so cool to see that turnaround as a anti-patriot. Something else that I really love about Brian Flores, which is something that we shouldn't have to talk about, but we sort of have to because it's so prominent in the NFL, is that he's a person of color, and the sort of example that he's setting for other coaches, similar to how Mike Tomlin did it like 10 years ago, is showing that his color the color of his skin, I should say, doesn't influence how he is as a coach. And if anything, his ability and his talent as a head coach is something that will hopefully open the door for other head coaches to come through. And also, I just wanted to ask, how much do you reckon Flores' success or tenure at the Dolphins is going to be tied to how well Tua plays? How much are they going to like intersect with each other over their careers?
I think what you've said there is an amazing question, but I think that's almost out of his hands in a way. So you've got obviously the talks. There were the talks of trading Tua for Deshaun Watson, I believe, were quite big talks at the start. So it's, I believe, the general manager and the sort of the hierarchy at the Dolphins has bought into Brian Flores, and I believe they're very pro Brian Flores more than they are pro Tua.
Yeah.
So obviously, if Brian Flores can make something of Tua, I think that will cement his legacy and really. However, I think if Tua fails, Brian Flores will almost be given. I think they'll give up Tua before they give up Flores. So he'll be given another chance. They'll bring in a big free agent if there's one available, or I don't think they'll draft a quarterback, but they'll try and bring in someone like a Deshaun Watson if the relationship clearly isn't working. I think they're more Flores than they are Tua. So he has job security in my opinion.
Nice, thank you very much. Thorns and Shaps, some really good points there. And I think it is really important to talk about that, kind of like you said right at the end there, that he is a person of colour who is succeeding, and it's really, really good to see. And kind of, like you kind of mentioned as well, with the Dolphins GM, is a guy called Chris Greer, who is also a person of colour, who has built that team the last year or so with Brian Flores, and it'd be really, really good to see them succeed in their jobs. I think it's really, really important to have those kind of role models for people of colour. I think it's really, really nice. And I think that's a really, really good segue into my kind of pick, who is a controversial pick because he's been mentioned already by both of you during this segment. But Mike Tomlin, for me, is such an underrated head coach. And, I know he's always kind of been in the conversation, but he's never in the conversation. If you go around and ask NFL fans outside of Pittsburgh, I can say that I've been there. Who are the best current head coaches in the NFL? Bill Belichick, Andy Reid, Bruce Arians is going to be mentioned now, isn't he? Sean Payton is probably always up there. And Mike Tomlin's been doing it. He's been the head coach of the Steelers since 2007. He's never had a losing season. Not one. Of those 14 seasons, 11 of them have been winning seasons, and 3 he's finished 8-8. One of them was last year when Roethlisberger was injured for a lot of it. Out of those 14 seasons, they've made the playoffs 9 times, made the AFC Championship 3 times, of which he is 2-1 in that game. And then obviously he had that one Super Bowl, one of the best Super Bowls ever against the Cardinals. All that in mind, he's never won Coach of the Year, which is just ridiculous. Like, not even in the year he's the youngest head coach ever to win the Super Bowl, and they didn't even give him Coach of the Year. Like, I know it's based on the regular season, it's not based on the playoffs, but like it's just, you know what I mean, like a man that's breaking records doing his job, and you just like don't give it just frustrates me not giving someone the credit they deserve. Like the Steelers compete year in year out, and like against like a Ravens team that have been good for a very long time. The Browns are there. Um, and the Bengals were good for a while under Marvin Lewis as well. So you think like he did have a tough task to do every year. The Ravens and the Bengals were always like around the Steelers, but he's just made them competitive every year. What I also forget, and I kind of raised this last week with Bill Belichick winning those 2 extra Super Bowls with the Giants when he was their defensive coordinator in the 80s. Mike Tomlin was also the DB coach with Gruden at Tampa Bay when they last won it, which I thought was quite fun. So he technically has 2. But yeah, sorry, that was just a fun little fact I like to throw in at the end, just to prove, he's a good coach. But like someone to hang around for so long in one job and succeed year in, year out, and make the playoffs, pretty much all the time. It just doesn't happen. Like, well, it does, but like you think you got Belichick, Carroll, Peyton. Even like Andy Reid lost his job, man, like from Philly. So like, and it's taken Andy Reid till last year to win a Super Bowl. So I just think Tomlin's underrated. I know he's nearly in that conversation, and people mention his name all the time as like almost an afterthought, but he should be one of the guys in the conversation for best head coaches, and that's why he's my underrated head coach.
I like it. I did mention Arians Tomlin as being like a what's the word? I can't remember. I said something about Tomlin which wasn't good. Not bad, but not good. So I was wrong. Anyway, it's interesting you mentioned Bruce Arians because he was one of my honorary mentions because he didn't become a head coach in the NFL till like 2013, I don't think, with the Cardinals, and he had this crazy career where he was a coach in college and everything till like and then 2012. So he coached for like 40 years or something before he finally got a gig. Which again, nothing to do with your point, but I think Bruce Arians is a phenomenal character and someone that should be mentioned. And yeah, Mike Tomlin doing that doing this job for that long is incredible. Regardless of anything, it's incredible. And also to do that a lot against the Patriots, like I think they lost when they lost in the conference championship. They lost to the Patriots, who went on to win. No, not win. No, they did win. Yeah, they went on to win the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I think they did. I think that was the year they beat the Seahawks. Potentially, might have been sooner. No, anyway, they did lose to the Patriots. So yeah.
Yeah. So that's something I'd ask is, do you think Tomlin would be reconsidered, or he'd be more highly thought of if he wasn't competing against the Patriots year in, year out for those 15 years?
Yeah, I think that's the thing in it. And I think that's the same with like whatever sport you play, is that you're always going to be there's always going to be the team that you end up playing against, and there's always going to be that coach, and the Bill Belichick has got the most wins of all time and whatever, and I think you're always going to get compared against that guy, unfortunately, because you were part of his era. Like, there's different conversations for like historical coaches, like the John Maddens and the Vince Lombardis and everybody like that, because they didn't compete against Belichick and it was a different time and things like that. So yeah, I think it could have been a different story, but who's to say? And talking of kind of like, it could have been a different story. I mean, there's my honorary mention who I was going to bring up was Mike Zimmer with the Vikings, who has to compete with Aaron Rodgers year in, year out, and has kept his job and kept that defense kind of like they started this season as one of the worst. Like I think every single corner was a rookie. I think pretty much, and so like you talk about things that could have happened. I mean, if Teddy Bridgewater doesn't get injured and was carried on playing the way he was playing when he was playing for the Vikings, I mean, who's to say? But yeah, like there's a lot of different ifs and buts, and I think you beat a certain team. If he does beat the Patriots in that AFC Championship game and wins every AFC Championship game he's in, who's to say? But and I know I've repeated that a lot. Sorry, but yeah, I think he just there are great coaches that may not have won the Super Bowl every year, but still prove that they are a good coach. And I think when you win year in year out, and don't have a single under 500 record, you should be in the conversation, man. I think he's fantastic.
Yeah, I'd like to thank you first, because you reminded me, while we're throwing in extra Super Bowls, you obviously got Brian Flores has 3 with the Patriots, but then again, anyone who stays with the Patriots for as long as he did has got Super Bowls now, just because they won so many. But yeah, I didn't have an honourable mention, unfortunately. Maybe Hugh Jackson. That's a joke, by the way. I'd like to specify. if you couldn't guess from his whole one win as a Browns coach.
What was he? 1 and 30?
1 and 130 and 1, I think it was. Well, no, it was 1 and 31. Was it?
Yeah,
similar.
1 and 31. Yeah, because we didn't draw any games. It was because it was 0 and 16 and 1 and 15, or 1 and 15 and 9 and 16. Sorry. But yeah, I was gonna say
the Browns suck.
It's as a Browns fan speaking. It's with sort of, I hate to say it, but yeah, you can't take it away from him. The TikTok Steelers have been great under him. He's done nothing, but it's going against him year after year has been horrible to watch as a Browns fan. The Steelers are by far probably my most hated team in the NFL, just because they're the Steelers. And even I respect Mike Tomlin with nothing, but I think he's an amazing coach. He has a locker room. He had a locker room full of children and divas, and he's still grinding out wins with all the drama that's gone around. Like, Pittsburgh has been nothing but drama for years. Again, talking with hatred here, but the fact is, even with all of that, he's been winning and he's been performing. He had Mason Rudolph at QB and he was still winning games. It's nothing short of miraculous what he's done in Pittsburgh. And as much as I hate him for it and wish he could have coached somewhere else in a different division, for a different team, there's nothing but respect you can have for him as such a dominant coach. And I think Dan mentioned it as well, producing one of the most exciting Super Bowls to watch of all time. But yeah, I completely agree. He is an absolute outstanding coach, and I've got nothing else I want to say about him, because it'll probably be positive, and I don't want to keep being nice to the Steelers.
I think you kind of left us on a nice point there to kind of finish up on. Shaps, is that taking us back to that fantastic Super Bowl. Hopefully that stays in my memory longer than the Super Bowl just gone does, because I'm fed up of watching duds. The Patriots and Rams, I feel like it's like every other year we get a good one. So here's to next year's Super Bowl. Right. Thank you, boys. Thank you for joining us. Lovely talking to you as always. And hopefully see you both next time. Nice one, Thorns.
Sir, see you next week.
Nice one, Shaps. Catch you next time, bro.
Yeah, thanks for having me join. Much appreciated.
Welcome to the squad. Catch you all next week.